Let's talk about the first 72 hours of LSAT prep because most students start in full on panic mode. I mean, you Google how to study for the LSAT and you immediately get hit with 17 different contradictory Reddit threads. So now you've got seven different browser tabs open, two different apps, and a $300 prep book sitting on your doorstep, all before you've even opened a single LSAT prep question. This is totally normal, but also completely backwards. Because the first thing you need when you're starting your LSAT prep isn't another app or another prep book. It is clarity. And when we work with students, one of the first things we ask them is, do you actually know what the LSAT is even testing? And 9 times out of 10, they'll say something like logic or reading fast, or my personal favorite is tricks. The real answer is, of course, none of those. The LSAT is testing how you think. That's it. Can you read something complicated and immediately see the structure of the argument? Can you spot what's missing? Can you tell what's assumed and what doesn't logically follow? Can you tell the difference between something that's relevant and something that feels true but doesn't actually help? If you can do those things, you're golden. But if you can't, if you're just reading for content and for vibes, you're going to fall for the same traps over and over again. And the LSAT is, unfortunately, designed for just that. So instead of asking, what course should I take, or which LSAT podcast should I binge first, hint mine, start here. What is the LSAT actually measuring? Because when you get clear on that, everything else gets easier. You stop chasing new tips every 24 to 48 hours. You stop bouncing from one random Reddit strategy to the next, and you start focusing on what truly matters, learning to think in the language of the LSAT. That is the game, not who can read the fastest, not who memorized the most question types, but who can calmly break down an argument, see what's wrong with it, and predict what the LSAT writers are trying to trick you with. That is the foundation. If I were starting over with my LSAT prep today, that's where I'd begin, not panicking, not looking for shortcuts, just learning to think like the LSAT. So once you stopped panicking and you actually figured out what the LSAT's really testing, now what? That's where most people get it wrong. They'll say, okay, cool, the LSAT tests how I think, but then they immediately jump into doing 50 LSAT questions a day and timing themselves like it's the actual exam. That's like learning to box by jumping into the ring before you even know how to jab. If I were starting over from scratch with my LSAT prep, I would spend the first 2 to 3 weeks at minimum doing something that feels slow, but is actually the fastest way to improve. You build your core LSAT skills, like, for example, understanding what conditional logic actually means, or knowing the difference between necessary and sufficient conditions, and breaking down arguments into their parts, conclusion, premises, and assumptions, and learning how to read critically, especially in reading comp, so you're not stuck highlighting random facts like you're cramming for a science test, like a science test. And these aren't bonus skills. They're not nice to have, they are mandatory. This is the language of the LSAT. And if you don't speak it fluently, everything else becomes harder. So for that reason, when we work with students, we actually slow them down here on purpose. Not because we want to torture them, but because once you've truly internalized these core ideas, every single question becomes easier to decode. Think of it like training wheels. Most students rip them off too early. They want to go fast, they want to get through the material, and I get it. But the LSAT doesn't reward speed, it rewards depth. If you don't understand what makes an argument tick, no amount of speed drills will save you. So instead of trying to memorize every question type or hunt for the perfect strategy video, I want you to sit with the fundamentals. Practice slowly and ask yourself, what is this question really testing me on? And what core skills do I need to answer this with confidence? That's what I would do for the first few weeks. No fancy tech, no new tools, just getting fluent in the language of the LSAT. Because once you've got that down, now you're ready to start actually practicing. And once I've got the foundation in place, like I actually understand what a sufficient assumption is, and I can explain it without reading off a flashcard, now I start practicing. But here's where I do it differently than most students. Most people think practicing means opening up a textbook, doing 25 questions, checking the answer key, feeling bad, and doing it all over again tomorrow. But if I had to prep again in 2025, I would go way slower and get way more out of it. I would do 3 to 5 questions a day, one section tops, never more than that, with full focus, zero distractions, phone on airplane mode or in the other room. And then, and this is the important part, I would review what I got wrong like my life depended on it. Because here's the thing, improvement doesn't happen when you do the question. Improvement happens when you figure out why you got it wrong. That's where the learning is. And I know that sounds obvious, but most people don't actually do it. They finish a set, glance at the answer key, go, oh, duh, I guess B makes more sense. I get it. And they move on. But if you really want to improve, here's what you want to do. You go back to the question you missed. You break it down line by line, and you ask yourself, what assumption was I making here that led me to pick the wrong answer? And then, what trap did I fall for, and how can I spot that pattern next time? We actually walk students through this exact process in our LSAT coaching programs, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this part alone often creates the biggest jumps. It's like rewiring your brain to stop falling for the same tricks. And here's a mindset shift that helps me personally. The goal is not to get it right. The goal is to understand the reasoning so clearly that you could explain it to someone else without looking at the answer choices at all. Now, you might be thinking, what about full timed practice? And yeah, I would still do that, but not right away. Here's how I would ease into it. Once a week, I would do one full timed section. That's it, just one. Then by week 3 or 4, I would start adding in full length practice tests every other week. It's not about cramming in more reps, it's about giving your brain space to absorb what you're learning. That's how you build stamina without burning out. And that's how you make each practice session actually worth the time. Because if you're just blowing through questions to get them done, you're wasting your best opportunities to improve. Now, let's talk about the thing that makes almost everyone panic, timing. At some point, every LSAT student says the same thing. I get the questions, I just can't finish in time, which sounds reasonable, but usually it's not true. What's actually happening is this. You think you get the questions, but you're missing something important. And that's what's slowing you down. So I'd remind myself, you don't fix timing by going faster, you fix timing by getting clearer. Let me show you what I mean. When you really understand an LSAT question, like you've read the stimulus, you know the conclusion, you understand the flaw, you've predicted the answer, you move fast because there's no hesitation. But when you're confused, even slightly, you reread and then you reread again. Then you look at the answers and you go, well, A sounds good, but C kind of works too. And suddenly it's been 90 seconds and you still don't know what the argument actually said. That is the real time killer. It's not your reading speed, it's your clarity. In coaching, this comes up constantly. Students will say, I just need to speed up. But when we slow it down and actually look at the question together, they're missing the core idea, like they didn't spot the assumption, or they mistook a background fact for the main conclusion, or they bought into a trap answer that sounded logical but didn't actually do what the question asked. Once we clear that up, timing problems disappear. Because here is the mindset shift. Speed is a result, not a strategy. Trying to go faster without understanding is like pushing harder on a locked door. totally ineffective. So here's what I would do instead: slow down in practice. You want to give yourself the space to understand the logic first, then you build speed later. You also want to train your eye for the right details. Every single LSAT question has a handful of keywords that tell you what's really going on. You want to learn to spot those. And finally, you want to focus on accuracy under normal conditions, not speed under stress. And this is especially true if you're still building core skills. Remember, the goal is not to finish all 25, 26 questions. The goal is to get as many right in 35 minutes. Those are very different approaches. And if I had to prep again, I would stop watching the clock every 10 seconds and I would ask, did I understand the structure of that argument? Could I predict what the correct answer should do before I looked at the choices? And did I fall for something that just sounded familiar? That's what matters. Fix that, and the timing starts to take care of itself. Now, let's talk about what most LSAT students do the moment they finish a practice test. They go straight to their score. The anxious scroll through the answer key. Okay, 13 wrong. Let's see. 76 raw score. What does that convert to? They open up the conversion chart. All right, 161. That's fine, I guess. Then immediately you start spiraling and thinking, why am I not improving? Totally normal, but completely unhelpful. If I could go back in time, I would stop tracking just the numbers and I would start tracking the patterns because LSAT progress is not linear. You're not going to get one more point per week like it's a tidy bar graph. Some days you score lower, but you've still made a big improvement in your understanding. Other days you hit a new high, but you have no idea why. That's why tracking scores alone is useless. It's like checking your weight every morning without ever looking at what you're eating or how you're training. So I want you to track what you're learning, not just what you're getting right. And we actually tell our students, I don't care about your score this week. Show me what you learned. That's what we want to see. So what should you actually be tracking? Here's what I would focus on. First, what types of questions am I still struggling with? Not just flaw questions as a category, but why those flaw questions still trick you. I would also want to look for what patterns we're seeing in the wrong answer choices. Are you falling for ones that are emotionally appealing? Or are you missing subtle shifts in language? Where are you wasting time? Is it during initial reading, overanalyzing choices, doubting your instincts? And which questions did you almost get right? These are gold because that's where you're on the edge of a major breakthrough. And I would keep all this in one place. Nothing fancy, just a simple journal or a Google Sheet or a Google Doc, 1 page per week maybe. Could be digital, a notebook, doesn't really matter. What matters is that it's consistent. Every week, I would write down what improved this week, what still feels confusing, and what you're focusing on next. That is it. No fancy analytics dashboard, no 17-color spreadsheet, just you, your thoughts, and your data. And when you start tracking this way, you become your own coach. You stop looking at your score like a grade and you start seeing it as one data point inside a bigger system. And that's how you actually get better, one smart pattern at a time. Now, I want to share with you some tough love. One of the biggest mindset shifts I would make if I were studying for the LSAT this year is this. I would stop studying to survive and start studying to win because law school admissions is competitive. Scholarships are limited, and the LSAT is one of the only parts of your application you can still control. So if you're going to do this, do it like it matters. Now, I don't mean that I want you to grind yourself into the ground. I don't mean that you've got to quit your job and study 12 hours a day. I just mean take this process seriously. Not that you're just going to wing it, not that you're going to copy someone's old LSAT Reddit study plan from 2019. No more jumping from one free trial to another, hoping you magically stumble across the magic answer. You want to approach the LSAT like you're training for a championship. You don't have to be perfect, but you do need a real plan, a system, a reason behind every decision you make. And this is the part where we usually see the biggest shift in our students. The moment where they go from, I hope this goes okay, to, I'm here to dominate this test. Everything changes when you start thinking like that. And look, I get it. The pressure's real. You've got friends asking, what'd you score? And you've got law school deadlines looming. You've got TikToks telling you that law school's a scam. But here's what I would remind myself: this is not about anybody else. You don't have to prove anything. You just want to give yourself the best possible shot at the opportunities you want. The LSAT is not some final judgment of your intelligence. It's just a gatekeeper, it's a filter, and your job is to beat it so you can move on and do the work you actually care about. So, if I could sit down with my past self and say one last thing before starting this journey, it'd be this: don't half ass this. Show up like it matters, because it does. The better your score, the more doors open. The more money you save, the less you stress later. So, yeah, take breaks, take care of yourself. But when it's time to study, you want to show up with intention, not like someone who's hoping to just get through this, but like someone who's planning to win. So, that is exactly how I would study for the LSAT in 2025 if I had to start over today. Not a million apps, not a bunch of random tips, just a focused system built on clarity, depth, and actual thinking. Because it's not about being busy, it's about being deliberate. And if you can do that, not perfectly, but consistently, you're going to win.